My name is Richard Boyd Barret, and I'm the chairperson of the Irish Anti-War Movement, which would be one of the main anti-war coalitions in Ireland. I'm also involved in the People Before Profit Alliance, which is a new, broadly left-wing alliance campaigning against privatisation policies, against militarism, and for more democratic decision-making both in Ireland and across Europe. And I'm also a socialist. I'm a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, which is a component part of the People Before Profit Alliance. Well, there are two questions. First of all, about the Lisbon Treaty and whether it is in any way progressive or represents an alternative to the US model. Certainly this is the view held by much of the social democratic left both in Ireland and in Europe. And as a result, in Ireland, the social democratic left, the Labour Party, and some of the trade union movement supported the treaty precisely on the basis that Europe has better traditions of social welfare, that if it can develop itself militarily, it will be a counterweight to US power, and that would be a good thing for the world. In fact, I think if you look closely at the Lisbon Treaty, and if you look more generally at the direction in which European Union policy has gone, rather than the Europe that Lisbon envisages being different to the United States, it's mimicking the United States. It seeks to become a power, a global power, by doing what the United States itself has done. And you can see this in many levels. The Lisbon Treaty facilitates the privatisation of public services in a whole number of complicated ways. But one way, for example, is that while previously in European treaties there was a veto for national governments on the liberalisation of health and education services, which provided some protection against the privatisation of these areas, that veto, the unrestricted veto, is removed by the Lisbon Treaty and will allow the European Union to make a deal with the World Trade Organization to open up health and education services to privatisation across Europe. So this was a big concern for people in Ireland, and I suspect would be a big concern for people across Europe. And the other thing about the Lisbon Treaty on the military side is that it directly imports the logic of Bush's war on terrorism into the foreign and defence policy of the European Union, and talks explicitly about the war on terrorism, contributing to the war on terrorism. It expands the military tasks that the European Union could engage in from primarily peacekeeping tasks to what they call peace enforcement, which of course is a very different thing. It's really a euphemism for war. That you impose peace on your terms using military force. So this is something that I think if you're opposed to militarism and war, and if you would rather see society's resources put into public services and things that people need rather than into militarism and military competition on a global scale, you should oppose this sort of treaty in this direction for Europe. On the reasons for the Irish no vote, it was largely these questions. Although there were right-wing groups, anti-abortion groups, and there were also some representatives of elements of Irish big business who campaigned against the treaty. And in the case of these right-wing groups, the business groups, they campaigned against it because they said they were worried that Europe might impose tax harmonisation in the area of corporate taxation, which could undermine, they felt, the competitive advantage that Ireland had by having a low corporate tax rate. Now, for the left, we have no problem with increased taxes on corporations because we think it's outrageous that big business in Ireland pay such a low level of tax, and the fact that they do means there is not sufficient money for public services. But did these issues play large in the no vote? Well, there was polls done, independent polls showed clearly that the issue of corporate taxation, only 5% of those people who voted no expressed this as a reason for voting no. Only 5% of the no voters said abortion was the reason. The vast majority of no voters said they voted no because A, They were concerned about democracy and accountability in the European Union, and the idea that Europe would impose policies on them, but citizens would have no real say in who the people who are making these decisions were, particularly, obviously, the unelected European Commission, which has huge power within the European Union. And the other major reason that people were concerned was because of the military aspects of the treaty. Ireland is militarily neutral, traditionally. Ireland gained its independence in a fight against the British Empire, and therefore there's a very strong feeling among the Irish people that we should not in any way become a party to a new empire in Europe, or indeed there was huge opposition in Ireland to the Bush's war in Iraq and the fact that our government chose to facilitate that war by allowing the US military through Irish airports. And also then the question of workers' rights and public services was hugely important in the same poll, and indeed it was evident on the day of the vote that the no vote overwhelmingly came from the poorer sections of Irish society and from the working class in Irish society, who were opposed to an agenda which would privatise public services and which would undermine workers' rights and trade union rights. So these much more left and progressive reasons were the overwhelming reason why people voted no in Ireland. Well, it's very explicit in the Lisbon Treaty. It talks about the need for a renewed Atlantic alliance and makes reference to, I think it's called the Berlin Plus Agreement, which is an agreement for interoperability between European military forces and NATO. And indeed the Military and Security Committee, which was established as a result of the previous European treaties, the Nice Treaty, which is essentially the command structure, political and military command structure for the new European battle groups, has NATO representation on it. So the treaty is very explicit in further cementing the relationship between the NATO military alliance and European military forces. And it's also, another section is it talks about the need to respect the fact that many of the countries in Europe see the NATO alliance as the major vehicle through which they pursue their foreign and defence and military aspirations. So it's very, very clear, and as I say, at a physical level, the Lisbon Treaty and European battle groups are developing close interoperability and overlap with NATO at almost every level, joint training exercises and so on. And then, of course, we see this in a very explicit way in Afghanistan. They say that globalization is resulting in an ever-increasing gap between rich and poor at a global level. And rather than address that gap, it says that what Europe must do is strengthen its military capacity in order to deal with the inevitable revolts and insurrections and uprisings that will result from poverty. So this is a very right-wing response to injustice in the world. Instead of saying we must do something about the injustice, narrow the gap between rich and poor, they say Europe must arm itself to put down insurrections, to put down revolts, develop military forces that are capable of intervening in conflict zones militarily around the world to secure control of resources. And the same document is very explicit in saying that the rising power of China and conflict over important resources such as oil in areas like the Middle East and Africa require Europe to develop military forces to be able to secure European interests and control over these resources in these areas. So it is absolutely a recipe, very explicit recipe, for imperial military intervention by the European Union, and it's quite a frightening document. It is reminiscent of the documents of the Project for a New American Century, the right-wing think tank that really influenced the Bush administration to go to war in Iraq. And the other amazing document, really, and again frightening document, is the European Security Strategy, written by Javier Solana in 2004, where they explicitly endorsed the doctrine of preemptive war, which was used by the Bush administration again to justify the war in Iraq. We must attack Iraq because they might attack us at some point in the future, and the spurious claims about weapons of mass destruction. Solana's document says explicitly that the first line of defence may now be abroad. We must be ready to act before a crisis occurs and to militarily intervene in that situation. So it provides a licence, essentially, for European military forces to engage in preemptive military strikes. And I think clearly anybody who's opposed to war and wants to see peace in the world, this is not the direction that Europe should be going in terms of foreign and security policy. Well, the anti-war movement has had a very significant impact in Ireland. In 2003, when the US invaded Iraq, 150,000 people marched in Ireland. Now, in a country of only 4 million, this is a huge, huge demonstration. And opinion polls, then and ever since then, indicate a massive majority of people opposed to Bush's policies in Iraq, and the fact that our government facilitated that war by allowing troops to Shannon. So this movement has had a big impact, although the government have continued to collaborate with the war agenda, but have been quite unpopular as a result of it. The difficulty is that the main opposition party, called Fine Gael, are also supporting this policy. And the left in Ireland is smaller, even the Social Democratic left is smaller than most of our European counterparts. I mean, there is a Labour Party, but they only enjoy about 15%. And then there's other forces on the left, Sinn Féin, who are sort of left nationalists, enjoy 8 to 10% support. And then you have the Green Party, 3 or 4%. And then you have quite a fragmented radical left, which has enjoyed some electoral success and in some cases has got 10-15% support, but it is quite fragmented. So one of the big challenges, if you like, and particularly arising out of the no vote in Lisbon, which was largely a left-wing vote, and where most of the political establishment, both conservative and social democratic, supported Lisbon, but the majority of people opposed it. The challenge for the radical left is to translate that no vote into a new political organisation that isn't just campaigning against the Lisbon Treaty, but is campaigning on the range of issues: opposition to war, opposition to privatisation policies, and for more democracy in decision making, whether it's nationally or on a European basis. And I think there is quite a strong mood for that after the Lisbon no vote. And even before the no vote, the organisation People Before Profit Alliance, which we have helped establish, which is a very new organisation, got very close to winning parliamentary representation. In my case, I was very, very close to being elected to Parliament, in a huge shock to the political system, because they completely wrote off the possibility of radical left people getting into Parliament.
There's 5% hurdle? Or?
No, well, in my case I got 9% of the vote, and probably needed about 10.5% to be elected. It's a proportional representation system. But also other radical left candidates in a number of constituencies around the country got very, very close. And what was clear, and is clear, is that instead of these radical left candidates being seen as isolated individuals in a particular area, had there been some national alliance between them, which gave them national visibility and not just local visibility, we would have had quite a few of these people. That would have made the difference to them being elected or not being elected. So this is what we hope over the next couple of months, 6 months to a year, is to cement further the left alliance that was instrumental in the no vote. And there will be local and European elections coming up in May to June of next year, and we think that the radical left is going to make quite significant breakthrough in those elections. I would say this, that the European establishment are hoping that they pick Ireland vote again. And I think what people in the Czech Republic and right across Europe do in that regard is quite important. One of the other important reasons why people voted no in Ireland was because they were outraged when they discovered the rest of Europe was not going to get a vote the way we were getting a vote. And I hope that the no vote in Ireland will send a signal to people across Europe that they should be demanding their say also. That you should have the opportunity to examine this treaty, examine the provisions of it, the details of it, and make a democratic decision as to whether this is the sort of Europe we want. So I hope over the coming months, if they try and force Ireland to vote again, you will come to our support, and we will see demonstrations in Europe saying no to Lisbon until we all have a say on it, and all have a say on what sort of Europe we want.